Everywhere you look in Toronto, these old 2 to 3 story buildings line our streets. It's an iconic Toronto look. These buildings sit on major avenues and transit corridors, like right below me is Line 2 currently, and they're zoned for growth. They're in high demand, and a lot of them, especially the rundown and vacant ones, are inevitably going to be redeveloped. And when that happens, you'd think we'd replace them with homes like mid-rises that are 4 to 11 stories that add new homes without overwhelming the streets. But that almost never happens. Instead, these places sit like this for years while the developer fights with the city to get 50-story project approved, and they just stay in review limbo forever. So today I'm going to get into why mid-rise housing isn't happening in the very places that it makes the most sense, like this site behind me, and why a little-known policy called the community benefits charge may have something to do with that. So what exactly is a mid-rise condo? Well, mid-rise condos are typically between 4 to 11 stories tall, and you'll find them on a lot of major streets like College, St. Clair, Queen, especially east of the DVP, and sections of Yonge Street. They're what planners call gentle density, and they add housing to a neighborhood in a gentle densification way without changing the whole entire character of the neighborhood. Instead of stacking thousands of people into a single tower, mid-rise buildings spread that growth out across the city. It also means better streets, you get more complete communities with walkable blocks, active storefronts, and human-scale buildings, not wind tunnels and shadow canyons.
And mid-rises are often cheaper to build than high-rises. They don't require deep excavation or multiple elevator cores, which just overall means lower construction costs, which can translate into more affordable units or a better chance for smaller developers to get involved. Mid-rise condos also just spread out the density, so you don't end up with, say, one city block that has 4 towers and 5,000 people living on that one block. Instead, you have, say, 5,000 people living across 10 city blocks. This helps with all types of congestion, including pedestrian congestion at crossings, car congestion in and out of buildings, and transit stop congestion. Just imagine every morning between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., you have 1,000 people going on this one streetcar stop and then getting off throughout the city, or across 10 different stops, you have 1,000 people getting on the streetcar and off at different times. It just keeps the overall volume lower instead of sudden surges. And a great example of that you'll get to see soon if the Eglinton LRT ever finishes is Ontario Science Centre stop. There are so many high-rise condos that they built there in anticipation of the LRT, but then going along Eglinton, especially east into Scarborough, there is no housing built along Eglinton. It is just empty, vacant strip malls that are run down, and so you'll see these surges at the stops. And so that's just a perfect example of how mid-rise housing doesn't lower the amount of housing, it just spreads it out.
If you walk along St. Clair, especially west of Avenue Road, you'll see a bunch of them. It's actually one of the better examples in the city. But as you can see from the mid-rises behind me, and even the mid-rise across the street directly behind me here, they're decades old, and that's just because we're not really building these mid-rise condos anymore.
To understand how we got here, we need to talk about Section 37 and what replaced it. Section 37 was part of Ontario's Planning Act. It gave cities the chance to negotiate extra benefits from developers if they wanted to build taller or denser than what the zoning allowed. So let's say the restricted height limit was 20 stories in an area and a developer wanted to build 30 stories. A city councillor that represented that area would then negotiate with the developer and say, okay, you can build 30 stories, but in exchange, you need to build a daycare for the area, or a community center, or a park. And so they would trade off height or flexibility in zoning for community benefits. Every deal was negotiated case by case by city councillor and their team, and then the developer and their team. So obviously, big-time developers would come in with their team of consultants and lawyers and would obviously have the upper hand and most of the time come away on top in these negotiations because, I mean, a city councilor just can't compete with that. Smaller developers, on the other hand, then felt like they were being shaken down. They've already paid development charges, but now they're expected to pay even more when development charges are already for infrastructure in the area and they're not even being spent by the city. It's kind of like having to pay off a goon after already paying off the mob boss, if that makes sense. But it just wasn't something that was working. Some city councilors were better at negotiating than others, so some areas were getting lots of great daycares and parks and community centers in the areas, and others weren't. So in 2022, the province scrapped Section 37 and replaced it with the community benefits charge, or CBC. The idea was to simplify things, make it easier, less work on counselors, no more kind of backroom deals or negotiations like that. Instead now it's just a flat fee up to 4% of the land's value at the time the building permit is issued. Now, take note of what I just said. That is 4% based off the land's value, not the size of the building or the number of units you're building. So that means whether you're building 20 units or 500 units, you're going to have to pay 4% of your land's value in community benefits charges. So for mid-rise units, especially in prime locations where land is expensive, the math just doesn't work and they're forced to build tall.
And not to mention, this just discourages smart development. If your land has high value, then that means it's obviously close to transit, jobs, shops, and places where people want to be, which just so happens to be exactly where the city wants housing. So why are they discouraging developers from building housing here? And this land here is a great example of what could possibly be a building and site that isn't able to be developed due to the high cost, and one of those high costs is the community benefits charge. This was supposed to be a mid-rise condo, so this is one of those sites where cost put the developer out, and now nothing's going to happen and they're just going to try and sell off their land. This project, for example, there's an Ontario line coming up, so they have an argument to build something super dense, but as you can see, we're on Danforth, and it is flat as a pancake over here. And they want a 49-story condo to be here, and they've been in review limbo forever. They've been rejected by the city. They've gone to the OLT, and they had that hearing adjourned, so that didn't even go anywhere anyways. And so this is just a prime example of something that sits in review limbo for years and never goes anywhere because the developer needs to build so tall, whereas they could just do a mid-rise and get it approved very quickly. So right now, I'm across the street from a large lot that, as you can see, is for sale on Gerrard Street. This lot is almost 300 feet wide between the two streets over there and 150 feet deep to the north. It is exactly the kind of site that would be perfect for a mid-rise condo. There is zero dense development nearby. There's nothing behind me there. And then this way is all single-family houses as well. You're right on a streetcar line, and you're just south by a block of the subway line, and you're right by the Danforth GO station on Main Street, just 2 or 3 blocks away from that. So it is a hub of transportation, and there is no developments nearby here on Gerrard. And in fact, this is such an ideal location for missing middle housing and mid-rise gentle density housing that just on this side here, I'll flip the camera, is a 10-unit multiplex right there that just got built and developed recently. Now, based off of land that is this size and its location, we can roughly estimate it to be worth $20 million. That would bring $800,000 worth of community benefits charge. Now ask yourself, if you're a developer, are you going to build a 6-story mid-rise with 50 units? Or are you going to try and build a 30-story high-rise with 500 units? Well, let's look at the math and break this down. Let's just account for labor and materials and say you're making $200 of profit per square foot and your average unit size is 600 square feet. That's $120,000 of profit per unit. Sounds pretty decent, but you have to pay $800,000 in CBCs. So that means you need to sell 7 units just to cover that one charge. If your building has only 50 units, that's 14% of your entire inventory just going towards the CBC. Add development charges to that, and that's roughly an additional $3.5 million in cost, which would require selling 29 units just to cover that. So to cover development charges and CBCs, you need to sell 36 units or 72% of your inventory. So what do developers do? Well, they either walk away from these sites or they just push for much taller buildings like that development on Danforth and Pape. And that's why so many of our major avenues just sit frozen in time, while all the growth gets tunneled into tall 50-story high-rise condos clustered around a handful of sites. Now here's where this all really starts to show up on the streets. This building behind me is 2359 Danforth Ave. It is on Danforth, which is a major avenue. There's bike lanes, tons of shops and amenities nearby, and it's on a subway line. A perfect example of a mid-rise condo in a perfect area. But if you look around, behind me, there's not much, and then going the other way, there's one other mid-rise building, and then I'm gonna step into the bike lane here. You can see this whole side is empty, completely flat that way. Just dozens of blocks of those 2 to 3 story buildings, some of them run down, some of them vacant, and some of them thriving with tons of customers, and the apartments are all leased out. But there is no new development in sight. And the lack of mid-rise condos on major avenues isn't because people don't want to live here. I guarantee most buyers who work in the city would rather live here, steps from transit or steps from a bike lane where they can have an amazing commute, rather than be forced to the areas that they're being forced to now, like Barrie or Hamilton, or wherever they're being priced out to, basically. Just look at St. Clair west of Avenue Road. You've got mid-rise after mid-rise. It's not flashy, but it works. It's consistent density, good use of space, and they blend into the street nicely. The Danforth could be like that, so could parts of Bloor, College, Dundas, Gerrard, but they're not, because our policies are designed in a way that makes small, smart development one of the hardest things to do. So, how do we fix this? Well, the original goal behind the community benefits charge and getting rid of Section 37 was to make things a lot more simple, more predictable, and more transparent. But the way it's structured is clearly broken and is a total oversight when it comes to mid-rise and small-scale development. There are a few things that the city and province can do to turn this around. One of the first things they can do is scale a CBC based on project size rather than land value. A flat percentage just doesn't make sense, especially when you're going to be building a fraction of the units that a tall tower would. If they don't want to do that, then a second thing, or even in addition to, is introduce rebate or exemptions for mid-rise developers, especially along avenues or near major transit areas, which are areas that the city is trying to encourage development, especially with a lot of the recent policies they've been passing. They've been trying to build more in major transit station areas, MTSAs they call them, and along major avenues. So while they're adjusting policy, there's still a CBC as a barrier, and that CBC doesn't make it viable to build in those areas. So they would need to adjust that. And so aside from doing the first thing I said of no longer calculating it from land value, the other thing they could do is just provide exemptions to mid-rise or rebates to mid-rise developers. We can't keep treating every development like it's a high-rise tower and every developer like they're a major developer with millions and millions of dollars in the bank. The solution isn't complicated really. We just need to stop punishing projects that create livable, walkable, and community-friendly neighborhoods. At the end of the day, especially right now, mid-rise housing should be the backbone of Toronto growth. Even in areas like Vancouver and LA, mid-rise housing is becoming their go-to development. The missing middle that fills that gap between houses and giant towers. If we want more homes in walkable and transit-friendly neighborhoods, we really need to stop making smart development the hardest thing to do. Because without serious changes, mid-rise condos in Toronto aren't just dying, they're already dead. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I really hope you learned something, especially just with your perspective of when you're walking around Toronto and there really aren't that many mid-rises, and if you do see a mid-rise, most of the time it's quite an old building. And even if you just see a notice of development sign, you will never see a notice of development sign that says 10 stories. It will be 50, 60, 70 stories. Every year it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's just an economy of scales things, unfortunately, with the cost of building. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please feel free to share it with anyone that you think may be interested, or even just put it on your Instagram story if you thought it's something that other people should know about. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment what you think down below about what this means for the future of Toronto with no more mid-rise condos. Is being surrounded by tall towers something you're okay with? Is it something you like? Do you like that kind of skyscraper downtown Manhattan look? Or do you prefer more gentle density? Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.